People have been investing in the metaverse and virtual reality ministry for a few years now. So, what's the state of the metaverse ministry? That's what we're talking about today. Are you ready? Because it's time.
You're listening to the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast, part of the TCD Podcast Network.
Hey heroes, my name is Tom Pounder, and this is the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast. This is the podcast where I bring on ministry leaders and we talk about how you can do ministry more effectively in this very digital and online world. And it doesn't get more digital necessarily than the metaverse or virtual reality. And so today we're talking about the virtual reality ministry and metaverse ministry. And what's the state of it today? Where are churches at with it? What's going to be happening moving forward? And the best talk to me about that is Stuart McPherson. Stuart loves the metaverse ministry. He's doing it right now, and he's got a huge heart for this ministry. And so today we talk about what does it look like and how can we move forward as churches to reach more people for Jesus Christ. So I'm really excited about having Stuart on the podcast. But before we get started, I do want to highlight the Church Digital, because at the Church Digital, and Stuart mentioned this in the podcast, is that we have a ton of cool learning communities getting ready to get started right now. So if you want to check out and learn how to grow your online ministry or get started in an online ministry, there's no better place than to go to thechurch.digital. That is the website. And in there, click Learning Communities. And there you will find out the different learning communities that you can be a part of today to help you learn more about ministry in the metaverse or ministry online or whatever. You're going to learn how to do ministry more effectively today because of these learning communities. So we want to encourage you to check that out today. Remember, thechurch.digital. Go to it today and find out all the different learning communities and blogs and podcasts that you can be a part of today. All right, so now without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Stuart McPherson. With me right now is my friend Stuart McPherson. Stuart, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I see you've got some like a VR headset back there behind you. Is that what I see?
Yeah, it's two of them. It's the MetaQuest 2 and the MetaQuest 3.
Nice. What do you play with most?
Mainly the MetaQuest 3 now. When I got started doing like metaverse ministry, got introduced to it through the MetaQuest 2, and probably like most people, which we'll probably end up talking about this, like most people, I was waiting to see what Apple was going to roll out with before I decided which headset do I want to check out most, especially with that price tag that was attached to it. And so for me, it came down to like, I love what Apple dropped. I'm an Apple individual. Like I'm sold out to Apple for pretty much everything, but I couldn't justify the price tag for some of the same features. And really, they didn't provide me some of the platforms and components that I needed to continue on the ministry journey that I've been on. But what the MetaQuest 3 provided was obviously a smaller price tag and some of the AR features that I was wanting to play around with. So I've been playing around with that one a little bit more.
That's cool. Okay, so the MetaQuest 3 does have some AR features to it?
It does. Now, I'm still not like proficient with it yet. Like I'm still trying to figure it out, but I got some ideas, Tom. I got some ideas.
Good. Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about some of that kind of stuff. Well, Stuart, I know who you are. You've been on my podcast before, and you and I run in the same circles a lot, so we come across each other a lot. But some people may not know who you are. So briefly share about who you are and what you do.
Yep. So Stuart McPherson, currently work with Lakeland Church in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And I am a full-time VR campus pastor for the church, position that I got into about 3 years ago on what was supposed to just be a 6-month trial. Clearly that went way past that trial period. But yeah, so currently doing that and just exploring really what the metaverse has to offer for the church today.
Yeah. When you said the 6-month trial, I've heard your story, and because you've been on different podcasts before, and you talked about, I think, on ours as well. But when we talk about the 6-month trial, who was it that said, "Okay, we got to go more now"? After the 6 months, was it you who said, "Okay, this is great. I love this. I want to keep on doing this," or was it the church saying, "Stuart, you're the guy for this role"?
So it was really more of a 6 months came and went kind of thing, and we just
Okay.
kind of found ourselves still doing it. Um, but it was probably more on my side where like I was really seeing the fruit that was coming from us being in the VR spaces.
Hmm.
Um, and so I didn't really want to give that up. In fact, I saw really some more opportunity to it. Um, and I even went to my leadership and I just presented the idea of like, hey, if we're really going to do this thing called being a church in a VR space, then I think that we need to up the ante on this a little bit. For us at Lakeland, we sit on a corner, and Tom, we probably did talk about this last time, but we sit on like a corner of like two main streets in our area. So anybody who's going through a crisis or anybody who is going through a hard time, anything like that, they're most likely at some point in time going to cross paths with Lakeland.
Yeah.
And so, as I'm sitting at my desk looking out the window one day, watching these cars whizzing by, I was like, dude, how do we become that in the VR space?
Mm.
And so, for me, it was just saying, hey, let's up the ante, let's double down on this, and let's try to be a presence that is there as consistently as we possibly can be, instead of just a blip on the radar every Sunday for an hour or two. Let's try
Yeah.
to be a church in virtual reality. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, let's get into where, okay, you've been doing, metaverse ministry for a number of years. It's been out for a while. Where do you feel like the state of virtual reality metaverse ministry is right now? Do you feel like there's a lot of momentum moving forward, or where do you feel like it is at right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the clarifying question in that is like, what is the metaverse, right? I
Mm.
think like when people think of the metaverse, their first thought is they go to what Facebook is doing by switching their name to Meta, and they're thinking of like their VR platform. When in reality, like metaverse is like all encompassing. It's like pretty much anywhere that you can do life within a digital platform. So this would be like gaming. This would be in the VR spaces. This is the AR technology. This is the mixed reality kind of stuff. So any place where somebody can do life with other people in community can be a metaverse space digitally, right? So really the state of the metaverse and like where churches are with it is kind of like in this holding period, to be honest with you. Like there's a lot of excitement around it. In like pre-COVID, like you started hearing some rumblings of it, and then clearly with COVID there was this, hey, let's go full send into this thing. And so there was easy technology to grab a hold of. There are easy platforms to hop into. The pathway into a VR space to do VR ministry really wasn't all that hard. It was just more of, hey, let's be pioneers and let's explore. Let's cut down some woods and blaze some trails, and let's see how can we do this. Um, and as the years have gone on, it's kind of turned into this. Well, we know that it's there. We know that there are hundreds of millions of users of VR on a daily, weekly basis. But we also know that there are people who are flooding back into the buildings. We also value the person to person relational connection with one another. So there's been a lot of focus that has gone to that. And then on top of that, as mentioned earlier, all of a sudden you hear big names like Apple saying, hey, we're going to create a headset. And so it kind of put this pause on everybody, just going, okay, so let's do what Stuart did and let's wait and see what it is that Apple produces and see how this ups the game. My personal opinion was when they made the announcement was that everybody was going to hold off on this, and then we were going to see this uptick after the headset came out. The problem for me at the time was I didn't know what all platforms were going to be made available with the Apple headset. So was it going to be conducive to metaverse ministry, or was it going to just be some like a product that's out there but doesn't really help in any way? Whereas Meta came out with their MetaQuest 3 and they said, hey, we know what Apple's wanting to do. Here is our version of it. So it's kind of been in this waiting period, and I just kind of feel like the church right now is sitting there saying, so we kind of know what VR ministry is at this point, but what is the next thing?
Mhm.
And how do we get into that? And what is it going to look like for us? So I think there's kind of like this, man, we're sitting on the edge of something that could be really cool. And at the same time, it's like, but we don't know what it is, and we don't necessarily want to be the first ones. We want somebody else to get shot first in the process.
Yeah, they want some of the bigger churches who have a little bit more money, a little bit more staffing to start exploring, then they can kind of open up the doors for us.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of where, digital online ministry was for a number of years as well, is that, it was this fringe thing before COVID, and then when COVID came, it was the thing that everyone did. But then quickly after people started going back into the buildings, it became, instead of trying these new technologies out and new ways to reach people, they're like, oh, they're coming back to the building. Maybe not as many as used to be, but they're coming back. Let's just we'll either put it on hold or we'll actually remove some of the great things that we were doing. Like one of the things that we started doing and investing in heavily at my church was YouTube. Over the
Mm.
course of COVID, we went really full on YouTube. And instead of pulling back from it, our pastors actually saw the legitimacy of it and how we were reaching more people. And so they said, let's do more. And so I've been tasked with doing more and trying to figure out more and more and how can we do more. How do you feel like churches are right now? Like the people that did jump into the metaverse and virtual reality, are they still trying to reach more, or are they even taking a step back and saying, I'm going, we're going to abandon this completely? Have churches abandoned it?
So some churches abandoned it, and I think that had more to do with the shutting down of AltSpace VR. So AltSpace was probably the easiest and church friendly platform, and church friendly I mean like user friendly platform for a church to get on to and start doing anything. I mean, it's what we started off with at Lakeland, right? So it was easy to have like custom world building. The trolls weren't really that high, and a presence in the area, so it was easy for most churches to get in and say, hey, we're going to start doing something in this space. But because of the ease of it, knowing that there were other platforms out there like VR Chat or Big Screen or Meta Horizon, most churches didn't want to venture out into the other platforms. So what happened was that you had like this collecting pot of all these churches that were doing ministry and running their services on one platform. And then March last year, AltSpace, Microsoft said, hey, we're shutting this thing down. And most of the churches, because they were unwilling to see what the other platforms had to offer, kind of got left with this position of like, well, we don't know what to do next. And to be fair, that was us with Lakeland. We had started looking into some of the other platforms like Big Screen and VR Chat and whatnot, knowing that they were big players, Rec Room. But for the way that we run and do ministry in the VR space, most of those weren't helpful to us because we live stream our services. What's happening in the building in real life, we stream into the VR platform. And so the only platform that was really out there at the time that would allow us to do that was Big Screen. So you've got this massive platform that a lot of churches were using that decides to close up shop. And instead of trying to venture off and see what else was out there, most of the churches just said, all right, well, that was fun while it lasted. And then you've got like a handful of us that decided, okay, so then let's see what else is out there. In my personal opinion, I felt like that was a God thing and a beautiful thing. I always kind of liken it to like this Acts movement of like all of a sudden here comes like this great, it's not a persecution, so I got to be careful with the word, but like you have like this stoning of Stephen that happens and this persecution that is coming down on this newly birthed church in Acts, and it causes everybody to disperse just as Jesus said that they were supposed to do, even though they're kind of huddling in fear. And so for the VR ministry, metaverse ministry churches, what happened was this platform shut down, and the ones who decided to roll with it and stick it out, said, okay, well then what's happening over here, and then what's happening over here, and what's happening over there. And so you ended up having some of the same churches that were doing it before, we're now taking the good news of Jesus into different spaces. And the beauty of what that provided was, if you spend any time in the metaverse space, if like, because like we're primarily in big screen now, if I tell somebody in big screen, like, oh yeah, do you know about VR chat, do you know about Rec Room, do you know about spatial, most of them go, no, what's that? So what happened was, we were secluding ourselves as the church into one platform, while there are all these unreached people groups that we were unaware of, that didn't know about alt space, that weren't being reached. So God was like, all right, enough of this, time for you guys to spread out. So, while it felt like a hindrance at first, trying to figure out what was going to be new and how do we do what we do in a new space, it was really a great way of getting the good news out to more people for those who decided to continue doing metaverse ministry. Now, all that being said, I just got done talking to Jay Cranda over X, I was about to say Twitter, just a couple of days ago, because as I was doing ministry in big screen, somebody was telling me about all the different VR churches that they go to throughout the week. Like, they're building up this document of all the different churches that are meeting in VR spaces, and what times and what days and whatnot. And they go to every single one of them the best that they possibly can. And they mentioned Jay over at Saddleback. So I just reached out to Jay. I was like, hey, how's it going? So here's like this big, massive church that most of us are familiar with, who are only a month in, I think Jay said, into metaverse ministry. And there, to me, that is like the example of, we waited, now let's launch into something. So to me, when we talk about state, it's like, man, we've been on this waiting period, and I think we're going to start seeing something like some new growth and some new happenings taking place. But Jay was telling me, it's like, dude, it's different.
Yeah.
We're having a lot of fun, but we're doing us in this space. And so it was just really cool. It's cool to hear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I got a few questions out of this, and I'm hoping I should have written some of these down, but while you were talking, I was like, "This is great." Okay, the first question is, and it kind of, you touched on it a little bit, but when you said that there are many different worlds out there, there's in many different platforms. Do you feel like that's a hindrance, or that's an opportunity? I heard you say it's an opportunity, that there are so many different platforms, and because, do people just like primarily like stay on one platform, or do they venture across all the different platforms?
Yeah, so from what I've witnessed with the people that I've connected with, most of them just typically stick to their platform.
Okay.
So it almost feels like, hey, I've got a headset, I don't know what to do with this thing. Here is this advertisement for this one platform, or I've heard of this. So they go and they download it and they hop into it, right? And then they never venture off of that. They just try to get accustomed to that platform that they're in. DJ Soto, when he and I talked about this when we were first getting in, he was like, dude, you've got to see each of the platforms as different countries around the world. And then you're going to have to learn that language. You're going to have to learn that people group in order to bring Jesus into that platform and speak their language. So he's like, alt space is the United States, and VR chat is China, and Rec Room is the Middle East, whatever. And so knowing that those people don't really travel around to the other platforms, like, they've become accustomed to their native language. And so for us to get dispersed, that was the beauty of it. It was like, okay, we as Lakeland have to learn big screen, and we have to learn the people of big screen, what it is that they like, in order to bring Jesus into that environment. While Fox River's in big screen as well. They're going into Meta Horizon, but all these other churches, like, okay, like, let's learn how to do this here. And they're reaching people that we at Lakeland aren't going to reach, because we're not in those other platforms, because it's not, again, it doesn't work with how we do ministry in that space.
Yeah, it's almost like, what I'm hearing and what I'm visualizing is that it's almost like, if you're a multi-site church and you have different sites, like, you may be doing ministry a little bit differently depending on the site. And the same thing
Mhm.
with the metaverse and VR and the different platforms, is that you're gonna have to tailor your message, tailor the way you reach it. And like what DJ said and you said about, it's a different country. you got to learn the language. You got to learn what works and what doesn't work. So that's really cool. Okay, so what would you say? Because this is where I hear a little bit of pushback when we're trying to reach gamers, and
Mm.
because we're starting to branch into Discord at my church, and everyone's like, oh, that's a gaming thing. Those kids just need to come in and just go to church in person and stuff. Like, how do you push back on people that will say, oh, they just live in this fake reality all the time? They're not. They got to get into real life work. How would you push back on that?
Yeah, I would probably say go listen to the Stew on This podcast where I did an interview with Mark Lutz, who runs the digital only
Yes.
church. And for this primary reason, in that interview, Mark did a really great job of just kind of explaining really the next generation and their view of like technology and like gaming, computer systems, and all that kind of stuff. He was like, like a boomer generation, Gen X, millennials, like it was either they had to adapt and adopt to the emerging technology, or for like a millennial, it was okay, this is part of my life and this is part of my life. And because my parents were really like, we don't know what to do with this technology, we don't know what to do with this connective interweb of online people all over the world. It was, hey, Cyril, when you get online, you be safe. You don't give out this information. You don't tell them anything about yourself, blah, 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 right? But the next generation, so you got like your Gen Z, Gen A, Mark said, there's no difference of life or personality between online so and so and in person so and so. He says it is who they are online and who they are in person is just who they are. They're sharing life stories with each other. They're not trying to really be somebody different. They just are who they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I have seen, especially with like digital and VR ministry, when it comes to that, is people tend to be way more real with us up front in the digital space than they are in person. So for me, what I always liken this to is like this is primarily in VR for the most part right
Mm-hmm.
now that I've seen, anyways. Um, but the avatar almost acts as like that Catholic confessional, whereas like I can't see you, you can't see me. I'm not trying to save face with you. You're not trying to save face with me. So I get like these people into our church services. They're like, "You're a pastor? Yep. This is a real church. Yep." He goes, they're like, okay, here's my baggage. Blah.
Yeah.
And they bring in all their bias, they bring in all their hurts, their habits, their hangups, and they're just like, fix me. I'm like, I can't. I know who can. Um, and so let me try to introduce you to who can fix you and help you in the process. But it's just like, dude, how long does a person like? How often do we hear the story of somebody's like, oh yeah, they've been coming to this church for years, and then like it's just like this slowly unpacking and this slow chip away, like the I forget what they're called, but it was like the Christian skit guys, that were famous for the longest time. Like they even had like a skit. It was like, oh, just chisel away here and chisel away there. And in these digital metaverse spaces, people are like, hey, I don't need you to chisel. Like
Yeah.
let's just go. I'm like, cool, like let's do this thing. So just, you got like people who are like, I'm going through a divorce, I'm addicted to pornography or a substance or whatever, and just like, I wouldn't get this with a first time visitor in a real life building. Like, cool,
Yeah.
like let's do ministry.
Yeah, and you know what? To kind of piggyback on that, I've discovered people are more apt to come to an online service, whether it's in the metaverse or whether it's watching on YouTube or something like that, than they are to go into a physical church building. Like it takes an arm and a leg to get them into a physical church building, but they'll check out your service anytime, right?
Oh, Tom, everybody's front door to your physical church is your online expression.
Yeah.
Most people who are walking in through the front doors of your physical church have attended your church for probably a month before they've actually showed up in person,
Yeah.
because they want to know who you are, what you're about. Do I vibe with this church? Do I like the person who is speaking? Do I like the worship? What do they have for me? So most people have shopped your church for a good month online, digitally,
Mhm.
before they've ever walked in through the four walls of your building, which then presses the button even harder for us to go, okay, if that's the case, then maybe we should be focusing a little bit more on this area, knowing that this is really where our first time visitors are at, and making sure that this is up to par of what we want them to experience of who we are. That way they feel even more comfortable before they show up in our parking lot.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I completely agree. Well, okay, so as we kind of move forward a little bit, where do you see virtual reality ministry, metaverse ministry heading in the future? Like we talked a little bit about the Apple headset, and you and I know we're both fanboys of Apple. Whenever Apple enters a market, they change the game, and now this one, the price tag's rather high, but the headset's amazing. And
Mhm.
so, where do you see things moving in the next, few years with this ministry opportunity?
Yeah, so I think I've heard somebody say this, and the more that I chew on it, I feel like that this is accurate. I think VR ministry at this point, or just VR in general, VR is VR. We know what it is and we know what it has to offer. And then so I think that's where we're at right now is like, okay, so what is that next thing? We know what this looks like. Is this really where we're going to stay, or is it time to check out something new? And I think this is what Apple has really ushered us into, is more of the mixed reality, like augmented reality side of ministry, which is the reason why I wanted to get my hands onto the MetaQuest 3 to really start playing around with AR technology, because I wanted to know, what does AR have for the church? Now, we have, and in general, as a population, as a culture, we've been playing with AR for a really long time. Um, Anybody who plays Pokemon Go has been playing with AR
Yeah.
for a really long time, right?
Hmm.
So this isn't like scary new language. It's just maybe scary in the way that it's getting presented to us now. It's the next adaptation of it. Um, for me, when I first heard, I said this to our tech director at Lakeland, when I first heard Apple's announcement of the headset of the Apple Vision Pro. Um, I said, I am more curious what this is going to do for tech directors in churches when all of a sudden the Apple Vision Pro no longer looks the way that it does, but it looks like your glasses on your face
Hmm.
that everybody is wearing every single day. And I just think of like all of the lighting, programming that he has to do, like all the screen projection, like we just got a new LED wall, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, can you imagine as a tech director where you don't have to program anything, because people augment reality wise, AR wise, can get the sanctuary to look however they want it to?
Yeah,
Like,
that would
I
be
was like,
wild.
dude, if you want like your traditional like glass stained window pew seating for your church experience, but you love the teaching of your senior pastor, or you love the worship, it's like, I mean, Apple has clearly shown like you can do that, right? Like
Yeah.
you can be on an airplane flying across the country, and instead of being on a plane and experiencing that surrounding, you can be up in the mountains of Colorado someplace watching a 300-foot, wide screen of whatever movie that you want to watch. You can take yourself out of your present environment and put yourself into anyone that you want to. So when it becomes accessible and easy to travel around on a daily basis, it's just a common thing, like a cell phone that we have with us. Thank you, Apple, right? I think that's where my fascination goes to, of what is that next thing. So for me, knowing that and seeing that that's probably the direction that we're going to go in our society, for me, for the church, it really boils down to, is like, well, what would it look like? There are some people who will probably just, either due to illness or physical capabilities or whatever, will never walk into a physical church building. Just can't, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but what happens when somebody develops an AR app, where you're sitting at your home on your couch, whatever, and you can dial yourself into your church's auditorium and experience the service, and feel like you're in the room with the other people who are experiencing it at the same time, even communicating with them as if they're sitting right next to you. That's where I think that we're going. I'm waiting for somebody to develop this type of app. I would love to be the one that does it. I'm not that person, because I think that there's going to be a whole bunch of money in this. I really do.
Yeah.
But in the same way that Subsplash is like, hey, we're going to be the app for churches. All you have to do is subscribe to our product. We will create the app for you. You get the app, you get the website. They communicate with each other. So whenever you update one, you update the other. I think somebody's going to come along and go, hey, we are the AR app for churches. This is going to speak. All you have to do is you need this camera system that gives you your 360 view, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do anything different other than have this camera system, have this, program for your computers. And we will have the app for you that anybody who has AR technology can download onto their headset, their glasses, whatever, and they will experience said church in their living room. Now, here's the scary part, right? I know somebody's going to hear me say that and go, you're taking people out of the building.
Yeah.
Possibly. But there's also a whole bunch of people that aren't in the building as it is anyways.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that the preaching of the word and reaching people stops just because they're not coming to your building.
Yeah. Well, again, you and I are on the same page on this. And again, when we first started doing online ministry at my church, that was the phrase we heard all the time. You're taking people out of the building. And we're like, it's not about the building, it's about hearing the message of Christ. And I always say, as we move forward to advance into digital and online ministry, whatever form it looks like, again, kids and adults, I mean, I'm 49 years old. Adults are on TikTok scrolling every single day, and kids are on TikTok scrolling. People on YouTube, they're being entertained. Why don't we share the love of Christ with them? Why don't we share the hope of Christ with them? Use those platforms and share it. That's what I feel like with Metaverse and VR and AR, is that these are opportunities for us to explore. Now, again, a lot of people are in the holding pattern, like you said. So, as one last bit of encouragement, Stuart, how would you encourage people who are holding now? What would you say to encourage them to say, hey, what's a step that they can take, or what is something that they can do? Because this, the church is notoriously slow on adapting to new technology. So what could you encourage, or how could you encourage them in this to take a step forward?
Two things, I guess. The first one would be, we can't be slow because the enemy's not slow. The enemy will figure out how to use it for his purposes before the church ever decides to jump into it. And what the problem becomes is that by the time that the church does decide to jump into it, we have all this negativity and all this darkness that's attached to it that we sit there and say we want nothing to do with it. And what's crazy is when I read through scripture and I hear Jesus' words, he says the gates of hell will not be able to overcome the church, right? So it sounds like we're supposed to be on the offensive, not the defensive. So it means we're supposed to be pressing into the dark spaces, right?
Yeah.
It just kind of seems to make the most sense to me. But to really answer your question, I would say one thing that I've kind of discovered with like digital ministry and metaverse ministry as a whole is there's somebody who's way more passionate about this than I am. I have spoken to so many people who are way more passionate about this than I am. Like this was just kind of handed to me, right? As an apostolic evangelistic type of individual, I'm like, dude, I'm going to go create communities for Jesus anywhere, and I'm going to reach people for Jesus by any means possible, right? But there are people who are super passionate about VR. They're super passionate about like Roblox. They're super passionate about online gaming. And really it just boils down to, okay, if you're already passionate about this, then how do I equip you to preach the name of Jesus to the people that you're already connecting with that I never will, right?
Yep.
And so it's just the first step really for almost any church is like, you don't have to be the one senior pastor. You don't have to charge somebody on your staff to divide their time to doing this and doing that. Find the person that's already at your church that's already passionate about this, and maybe disciple them and walk alongside them and show them what it means to be the hands and feet of Jesus in those areas, and let them speak the language that they're already familiar with and teach them how it is to bring Jesus along in the process. I think that's the first step, is just be well acquainted with your community, with the resources that God's given you, in order to charge them to take the gospel into the unreached places that you might be unfamiliar with, but they're not.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that would be like the first and easy step, is like, find the person who's not scared of the thing that you're scared of, and let them take Jesus into that space.
Yeah, actually, that's such a great word, because I'll just say again, relating it to me, is that I'm not a Discord guy. I don't quite understand it very well. I'm on it, but I don't quite get it as much as everybody else does. Well, I actually have a guy at my church who loves Discord, and so we were talking one day, and I he is doing now our Discord channel. Like we're getting ready to launch it, but if it was just left to me to do it, we wouldn't have done it. But because he was passionate about it, like what you were talking about, he loves Discord. We were able to get this set up, and hopefully we're going to launch it in the next few weeks. But the same thing with the metaverse. There's probably someone at your church that's playing, that has a VR headset, that loves their VR headset and is doing it. Again, it doesn't have to be you. You can mobilize and equip them and empower them, and then you've got another leader. You've got someone who's really doing ministry where in an environment that you're not necessarily geared for. So I think that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
Well, Stuart, this has been great. I could talk to you for a really long time, because I'm really fascinated by the metaverse, and my daughter's got a Quest 2, and we play with it every now and then, but it's still a little bit above my head. But I could talk to you forever. If someone is interested in learning more about the metaverse and about what you're doing, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, really the one-stop shop would just be my website. You could go to stuartmcpherson.org. That will get you to pretty much anything and everything that has to do with what I'm doing, metaverse related or not metaverse related. That's going to give you all my social media handles as well. That's going to take you to the Metaverse Church podcast that I host. We've got like monthly content that's coming out on there. There's some blogs on there as well. So that's the best way that you can get connected with me and kind of learn more about like just the metaverse side of things. The other thing that I would say too, Tom, as you mentioned at the very beginning, we run around in the same circles, especially with the Church Digital. We've got some learning communities that are coming up, and one that I am spearheading on really just metaverse ministry as a whole. It's going to be 8 weeks long, with really the whole goal and intention is by the end of that 8 weeks, you and your church are going to be ready to launch a ministry in the metaverse on any platform that you choose. And so that I would just say, like, head over to theChurch.digital and get signed up for that, knowing that that's starting here in just a couple of weeks, or I'm not sure when this is launching. May have already been launched.
No.
Anyways.
No, it's coming out right when it's launching. So yes, we will sign up for Stuart's stuff. I will include a link for all Stuart's stuff, including his stuff with the metaverse, but also the learning communities, because those are fantastic. These are new things that the Church Digital are doing. People like Stuart is leading one about the metaverse. Jeff Reed's leading some as well. And so there's some fantastic ones out there that you really need to sign up for. So I'd love for you to do that. And definitely connect with Stuart. Again, he is very active on social media. He loves the Arizona Diamondbacks. I don't know why, but he loves the Arizona Diamondbacks. Talk to him about sports. He'd love to talk to you about that as well. So Stuart.
Hey, Tom, wait, hold on. You can't do that to me about the Diamondbacks, because if it wasn't for Arizona sending over Patrick Corbin to the Nationals, you guys wouldn't even have a World Series right now. And Max Scherzer.
Amen. I will say this. Sorry, guys. I'll just wrap with this, but Patrick Corbin, he gets a lot of heat right now because he's not nearly as good as he was when he came over here in 2019. But because of what he did in Game 7, and actually even all throughout the playoffs, he was a key factor in the Nationals winning the World Series. So I will be forever indebted to him and for Arizona letting us have him.
You're welcome.
Hey, well, you guys have a World Series title of your own as well. So, but almost last year. So,
yep, almost.
All right, Stuart, it's always great chatting with you. So thanks so much for being with me today.
Yeah, man.
All right. What did you think? What encouraged you? What challenged you? What made you think differently after that time with Stuart? I love talking to him because, again, he is very forward thinking with technology, and he has such a huge heart for digital and online ministry, and in particular, metaverse and virtual reality ministry. And I'm really encouraged by how he challenged us as ministry leaders to take that next step. There's someone definitely more passionate about it today in your area that you can mobilize and you can empower to do this ministry so that it doesn't fall all on your shoulders, but that you can empower to do ministry. So I want to encourage you to check that out today. What stands out to you, though, about what we talked about? Put it in the comment section below, or you can hit me up on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Stuart's on Twitter. Hit us up on our Twitter links. We'd love to carry this conversation on a little bit more. All right, heroes. Well, thanks so much for being with me today. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, subscribe to it. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple, Amazon, all the different platforms. I'd love for you to subscribe to it so you get these every time they come out. All right, heroes. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And until next time, have a great one.